Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about how modern sexual philosophy is interfering with our ability to form and maintain relationships, and talk about ways in which we can hopefully improve the situation. The general state of modern relationships between men and women is contentious and perplexing. Unlike previous generations when people would meet each other through some social arrangement, pair off, and get married, we see current generations struggling just to get a date with a person of the opposite sex. This is a multifaceted issue with many contributing factors involved. There are movements of men such as MGTOW or men going their own way who are disavowing women and walking away from dating permanently. There are women who have been gripped by third-wave feminism and who refuse to settle for men who don't meet their unrealistic standards. We've finally come to a point in human history when our own technology is hindering our ability to mate and reproduce. I wanted to know the root cause of these issues. I wanted to know why this is happening. Prior to the sexual revolution, virtually all men brought women's status and value because of the standards and expectations of the time. Most people were married, people had more children than they do today, and divorce was rare. In the late 1800s, at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the rate of divorce was 0.3% per 1,000 Americans. According to the CDC, the current rate of divorce in America is 42%. In the past, women's freedom was limited, and there were women who stayed in abusive marriages because they didn't have other options. But actions were taken to rectify those type of situations. But now, only high-status men are actually benefiting from the practices of modern dating, while other groups of men are experiencing isolation like never before. In order for the current sexual marketplace to exist, it must be sustained by a belief system. Much of the information in this video comes from Jennifer Morse's book, The Sexual State, published in 2022. In the book, Morse breaks down the modern sexual doctrine that derived from the sexual revolution and has permeated our society into three distinct ideologies. The three ideologies combine to form the philosophy that sustains our core beliefs surrounding sex and supports our current hookup culture. This corrosive dogma has restructured the social order and has led to the current problems we are dealing with today. The alarming increase in sexless men, combined with the rate of single and childless women, as well as the amount of fatherlessness we are now experiencing, can be traced back to the destructive ideologies discussed in the book, The Sexual State. It is clear to me that until we acknowledge the elusive source of our problems, they will continue to propagate. So I'm going to start by talking about the contraceptive ideology. The contraceptive ideology says that sex and babies are not connected, and that people should be able to have as much sex as they want without the occurrence of pregnancy. It instills the idea that sex is supposed to normally be a sterile, child-free activity, and getting pregnant is considered an abnormal side effect. It says that everyone is entitled to have sex without reproducing. The contraceptive ideology suggests that consequence-free sex is not only attainable, but is actually vital to maintaining a person's health. Any kind of celibacy is not seen as a viable option because a life without sex isn't a life worth living. At the base of the contraceptive ideology is one message: you can do anything you want sexually, and nothing bad will happen. Nearly everyone wants to believe that this is true, but unfortunately, reality contradicts this empty promise. The idea that sex causes babies is a self-sustaining belief because people receive direct evidence all the time that proves that this is true. But the contraceptive ideology contradicts the evidence and promotes the idea that sex and babies have nothing to do with each other. The only way that this belief holds up is within the context of the widespread use and availability of birth control. the concept of sex as a sterile activity is predicated on the belief that birth control is perfectly reliable. The problem is that if birth control is so reliable, then why is abortion available as an option? In 2021, there were 625,978 abortions in the United States. That's over 500,000. The reason that abortion is legal is because of the failure rate of birth control. Birth control pills have a failure rate between 9 and 10%, and from what I've read, condoms have a failure rate anywhere between 13 and 18%. The reason that abortion remains a legal option is to support the false belief that sex doesn't result in babies, and that consequence-free sex is an attainable right for everyone. The contraceptive ideology also rests on the belief that hormonal contraception itself has zero consequences, but this isn't true either. The increase in estrogen that comes from hormonal birth control can lead to blood clots, which have the potential to cause heart attacks and strokes. Oral birth control also increases women's chances of getting breast cancer later on in life. According to an article published by the National Institute of Health, the most common side effect of women taking hormonal contraceptives is reduced libido. In one study, 43% of women reported decreased sexual desire as a side effect of the pill. The irony of this is that women who can now finally have sex without getting pregnant no longer want to. One of the most contradictory parts of the doctrine of the contraceptive ideology is the idea that everyone is entitled to consequence-free sex. If indeed sex were a fundamental human right for all people, then consent would no longer matter. And yet, consent seems to be the only restriction placed on sex that counts. If people were naturally entitled to sex, then if any guy were to ask me for sex and I said no, I would be denying him a basic human right, and my feelings about it would be irrelevant. Women would be forced to marry men that they don't want to marry. This is one of the ways in which the philosophy of the sexual state contradicts itself and doesn't hold up in reality. The contraceptive ideology also promotes sexual freedom as a virtue, and this has led to the rise of rampant promiscuity. I think promiscuity is bad for both men and women, but especially for women. I see videos on my feed all the time of young women who are crying in their cars, bawling because they slept with a man whose only intention was to pump and dump them. This idea that women should pursue sex and promiscuity the way that men do is very harmful for them. In the sexual marketplace, women lose value little by little as they age and accumulate more lovers. I don't like that this is true, but men are the ones who determine what makes women valuable because they are the ones who are primarily attracted to women, similar to how women get to decide what makes men valuable. Having a child is one thing a woman can do that actually increases her value, because even though she may reach an age where she is not as desirable to men as she once was, every child values their mother. Having a child causes a woman's value to decrease on the sexual marketplace and is bad for her if she's looking to date new men, but it does increase her overall value to the world and to the father of the baby as long as they are willing to commit to each other. All mothers are extremely important to their children, and it's almost impossible to break the bond between mother and child. Grandmothers are also highly valued by their children and grandchildren as matriarchs. Without having any children, women will continually lose value outside of their employment, and no matter what career a woman has, it doesn't compare to the significance she has as a mother. An employer will lay you off without thinking twice, but your child will always need you. However, if a woman spends her fertile years being promiscuous with promiscuous men, her only option may be to have a child out of wedlock or not at all. According to a study by Morgan Stanley, 45% of women ages 25 to 44 will be single and childless by the year 2030. Due to this depraved ideology, Women will find that their lives are meaningless at the point when it's too late to have children. This is going to be a serious wake-up call for them. The large number of promiscuous women in society is also making it difficult for eligible men to commit to one woman, and even if he may want children, the paternal instinct in men isn't as strong as the maternal instinct is in women. Men who would have otherwise been married 60 years ago, because that was the only way to achieve sexual access, now lack the motivation to pursue commitment with one woman because sex is so readily available for them. We're approaching a time in which the past is going to be better than the present, much like how people who lived in Europe during the Middle Ages had to acknowledge that life was better before the fall of Rome. To be fair, women are not the only ones being promiscuous. Plenty of men who have the option to engage in hookup culture do so without any qualms. It is in men's best interest to change sexual norms and return to traditional expectations surrounding sex, such as waiting until marriage and practicing monogamy, because these things preserve women's value. And yet, I've never heard a red pill man who is critical of feminism say that he would be willing to forego hookup culture, which was directly gifted to men by the second wave feminism movement. Instead, they make videos lamenting that there are no more young virgin women to marry, as they themselves actively pursue one-night stands, thinking the math is going to somehow work out in their favor. Gee, I wonder why women aren't virgins anymore. It's important that we hold both men and women accountable, but because women are considered the gatekeepers of sex, and because we bear the burden of the consequences of sex, it's up to us to start drawing lines in the sand. Each woman is responsible for her own standards and choices. If a man is more interested in collecting sexual experiences than being a father, then women need to make the choice to not reward a man like that with sex, no matter how good-looking or high status that man is. Because if you sleep with him and you get pregnant, your future child is the one who won't have a father in his life. You must summon the maternal instinct within yourself to care about any future children you may have. If he won't make a good father, then don't allow his DNA to get passed down. It's that simple. So I'm going to move on to the divorce ideology. The divorce ideology says that marriage is completely separate from children and sex. This means you can be married without having kids. You can be good parents without being married, and kids don't really need their parents. And this is why it's acceptable to drop them off at daycare centers and subject them to divorce. Children will always adjust after a divorce, and this is why it's okay to switch out sexual partners as often as you like. The kids will be fine. Nothing bad will happen. This ideology minimizes the necessity of marriage as it pertains to child rearing. It tells us that it's acceptable for someone to leave their spouse for any reason, and that the happiness of adults surpasses the need for stability in the lives of children. Simply not being happy anymore is a valid reason for initiating a no-fault divorce. We need marriage because not only does it attach mothers and fathers to each other, but it attaches children to their parents. A married father has more rights in divorce court than an unmarried father. Children are born immature and helpless and in need of a family support structure in order to learn how to live and behave on their own. Marriage creates a micro-society for children, and when they learn how to function within the family unit, it prepares them for how to function in society. It does this by teaching children boundaries and values that they will need to uphold as adults. Marriage is ubiquitous among almost all cultures and serves as the primary institution that exists for the protection of children. It also gives children the right to have a relationship with both parents. When parents get divorced, they typically tell their child that both of us still love you, we just don't love each other anymore. And this is confusing for the child. As Jennifer Morris outlines in her book, if one parent tells the child that they no longer love their spouse, the message the child internalizes is a deep sense of rejection, whether they're aware of it or not, because each child is composed of half of each parent. Morse conducted extensive research on children of divorced parents that concluded that when parents remarry and have children with a step-parent, children from the first marriage report feeling like unwanted leftovers. The reason divorce is a bad thing is because the stability of the children is sacrificed. According to the divorce ideology, this is acceptable because adult pleasure and happiness is more important than the well-being of children. The attitude of most parents is that kids are resilient and will adjust to any situation, which makes it okay to uproot their lives for trivial reasons. The truth is that there are long-term effects of divorce that impact children for the rest of their lives. Children of divorce have a higher risk of mental illness, emotional problems, behavioral problems, issues with authority, and are more likely to get divorced themselves when they become adults. It should be no surprise that after several generations of kids seeing their parents divorce, nobody knows how to make a marriage work anymore. Valid reasons for divorce do exist, such as abuse, untreated mental illness, adultery, and abandonment. And prior to no-fault divorce, men and women were allowed to pursue that course of action in the event that they were dealing with those issues. No-fault divorce took effect in 1969 in the state of California, and by 2010 it was legal in every state. Outside of infidelity and substance abuse, the most common reasons for divorce are described in vague terminology, such as lack of commitment and sexual incompatibility. You were compatible enough to have a baby with this person, but now you've changed your mind. What people tend to forget is that marriage isn't for adults, it's for children. I think it's unreasonable to expect that you'll maintain the sexual desire of your spouse 10 to 15 years after getting married. No matter who you marry, the natural course of time will result in not being as sexually attracted to your partner as you once were. I'm not saying it's good to have a sexless marriage because it isn't, but I think people need to understand the reality of getting married. I realize that people have needs, especially men, and it's a wife's responsibility to meet the needs of her husband, but getting a divorce simply because you'd rather have sex with someone else isn't a good reason, because the children pay the price. Even if you marry another person that you very much sexually desire, eventually you'll lose interest in your new spouse, because that's human nature. Minimizing the damaging consequences of divorce by way of no-fault divorce has caused it to become normalized and more accepted than it was in the past. Now that divorce is more common and is initiated by women 70 to 80% of the time, men now fear marriage because of the moderately high probability of it ending in divorce and the unfair treatment of men in family courts. The laws that dictate divorce courts and custody arrangements are skewed to benefit the mother. These laws are based on antiquated social norms that are left over from a time in which women didn't work to support the family, and people had good reasons for getting divorced. There was a time in the past when it was genuinely very difficult for a woman to earn enough money to support herself and her children, but due to the women's rights movement, that's no longer the case. When birth control pills first came out, the idea was to decrease the number of children born to unwed parents and eliminate fatherlessness. But instead of solving this problem, it had the opposite effect. The number of children born to single mothers tripled between 1960 and 2022. In 1968, 85% of children lived with both parents, regardless of marital status. By 2019, almost half of all babies in the U.S. were born to unmarried women. And in 2022, 31% of parents were single mothers. According to NPR in 2019, the U.S. had the world's highest rate of children living in single-parent households. Children raised in any single-parent household are at a disadvantage, even if they live with their father, because a man cannot teach a girl how to be a woman, and a woman cannot teach a boy how to be a man. And no matter what, the single parent usually has to work full-time, along with raising children and keeping the house clean. One person is expected to do the jobs of two people. And this places a huge burden on these people because everyone has limitations. Single parents are reliant on daycares, and childcare consumes about 30% of a parent's monthly income. It's also worth noting that children living with single parents are denied the same amount of parental attention that children who live with both parents receive. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the gender ideology. The gender ideology says that men and women are interchangeable, and any differences between them are socially constructed and thus unjust. The gender ideology rests on the belief that people are separate from their bodies. This is a spiritual, metaphysical way of viewing the world that most closely resembles psychology, but it's odd because for the most part we live in a secular society that doesn't validate spiritual worldviews. According to the gender ideology, men and women should be treated exactly the same because essentially they are the same. It also puts forward the idea that men and women alike benefit from the ability to have sex without commitments. The idea that there are no differences between men and women is just objectively false. Aside from the physical differences between them, such as the disparity in upper body strength and the capacity to give birth, there is a substantial contrast between the sexes psychologically. This is an issue because when women don't understand that men think very differently than they do, they continually interact with men in the same way that they do with other women, and this causes problems with communication. When you go to a foreign country and you try having a conversation with someone, you can't expect them to understand the language that you speak. You have to communicate with them in their language. It's a bit like that. The differences in hormonal exposure alone cause men and women to view and approach sex completely differently. It causes them to have different needs and desires. Women aren't as interested in sex as men are to begin with. If men and women desired sex equally, then dating apps would be 50% men and 50% women instead of 80% men and 20% women. This is where the gender ideology starts to break down. Men and women want different things out of sex. Women are more likely to want to commit a relationship. Men are more likely to want casual hookups. Casual sex is always more risky for women than it is for men because women naturally are the ones who have to deal with most of the negative consequences. Being alone with a strange man makes a woman vulnerable, and according to BYU, it can increase a woman's risk of experiencing SA and other forms of violence. She runs the risk of contracting an STI or having an unwanted pregnancy, even if she uses contraception. Getting pregnant completely disrupts a woman's life, permanently in most cases. For this reason, having sex is one of the most life-changing things that a woman can do, and this is why women are pickier about who they choose to sleep with. Men tend to view sex as a gain or a win, but for women, it's usually a net loss. When a woman has sex, her objective value decreases because men see body count as a measure of a woman's worth. She's much more likely to feel bad about herself after she has a casual sex encounter. It may cause her to lose self-respect. Sometimes her reputation is damaged. Additionally, women are much more likely than men to form an emotional bond with their sex partner. And if the guy sleeps with her once and disappears afterwards, that experience can be quite painful. And so there's an emotional risk involved as well. There are podcasts that exist to teach women how to sleep with men without developing feelings for them. The only time a woman actually gains something out of sex is when she gets pregnant, and that's only if the pregnancy is wanted. Obviously, there are women who want the same thing that men do out of a dating app. They want to hook up, they want the attention and the validation, they want to be shown a good time without any attachments, but in general, most women want to meet and date men who will eventually become their husbands. I'm going to talk about the rise of sexless men. Researchers at Indiana University conducted a study published in 2020 which measured the sexual activity of Americans ages 18 to 44, including the frequency of sex and the number of partners they have had. The purpose of the study was to understand sexual trends and behavior. Surveys found that among young men, sexual inactivity increased from 18.9% in 2000 to over 30% in the year 2018. Researchers have attempted to explain why the number of sexless men has increased so rapidly. Video games, easy access to sexually explicit material, and decreasing levels of testosterone in men may be causing them to desire women less. Additionally, the COVID pandemic and the delaying of adulthood may be causing fewer opportunities for men to meet women in general. However, according to an article titled The Rise of Sexless and Single Men, published by Anthony Farabee, it is only heterosexual men who are experiencing a decline in sexual activity, not homosexual men. If the factors for lack of sex were environmental and cultural, you would expect to see the same trends in men who are in the gay community, but we don't. Sexual frequency and activity in gay men has not changed. Have these straight, sexless men been sedated by porn, video games, and social media? Or are the shifting roles and power dynamics between men and women, along with current dating norms, causing more harm to young men than we are prepared to acknowledge? The role of dating apps. We know that within social environments, the rarer sex becomes the demand in the dating market. This is why college campuses are good for men and bad for women. The same principle applies to dating apps where the ratio of men to women is 3 to 1. Naturally, women are going to get more attention than men. However, the men who get the most of the attention on dating apps is the top 10% of high-value men. And these men have nothing stopping them from sleeping with different women while avoiding an exclusive commitment. This is frustrating for women who want a monogamous relationship, and also frustrating for the other 90% of men who don't get much attention at all. Thanks to dating apps, society has started transitioning towards polygynous relationships. Data collected from dating apps reflects this growing change. In 2020, a Tinder study revealed that most women only like 4 to 10% of men's profiles, and also that many women are more willing to share a high-status man than be in an exclusive relationship with a lower-status man. In other words, a small number of men are dating multiple women at once, while the majority of men aren't dating at all, and this contributes to the rise of sexless men. In polygamous societies, 10 to 20% of the men hoard all the women, leaving the majority of men without wives. If the top 10% of high-value men marry 4 women each, the bottom 30% of men can't marry at all. Another problem with polygyny is that it creates unstable societies. Anthropologists have studied polygamous societies predominantly located in Central Africa, where a small subset of wealthy older men hoard all the women. in order for younger, lower status men to gain material wealth and the resources to pay for the bride prices of females, they're willing to invade and plunder neighboring societies, resulting in chronic warfare. The desperation to gain sexual access also causes the large number of excess men to fiercely compete with each other, and this increases the rates of homicides and violent crime and undermines male solidarity in those countries. Monogamy serves the purpose of distributing women equally among all the men, which reduces the number of excess men who must be dealt with by being sent away to war or on expeditions. Civilizations who practice monogamy have historically been stable and peaceful. Monogamy increases long-term planning, economic productivity, and cultivates more paternal investment than polygamy. It's also associated with democracy and the prioritization of child welfare. Monogamy also eliminates the need to invade neighboring groups for brides and limits the potential for violence and patriarchies, and this creates balance. The more people move away from monogamy and towards various forms of polyamory, the less stable we will be. Okay, so in conclusion, the paradigm shift that took place after the sexual revolution has evolved for over nearly 3 generations. Prior to the sexual revolution, it was easier for men to meet women and get married. It was easier for men to have children. Men understood that women were valuable and that they had to earn the right to have a wife and a family by working hard and making good choices. Now that flawed feminist ideologies have taken over the culture, we can see their devastating effects. Men now believe that sex is a physical need, and if they aren't having it, then they're being denied a human right. They may believe that their lives aren't worth living unless they're participating in hookup culture. A large portion of sexless men may have been raised in single-mother households without a strong father figure to instill confidence in them. And on the internet, these guys are receiving validation from other sexless men who share in their bitterness towards women, which only reinforces the beliefs that hold them back. Combined with the merciless polygyny that dating apps create, the ideologies outlined in the sexual state are contributing to the problems people are experiencing now in dating. This is the same philosophy that has led to children without parents and provides the basis for no-fault divorce. It's connected to the number of abortions that happen in this country, along with the increase of STDs, sexless men, and the prediction that nearly 50% of young and middle-aged women will be childless in the future. What this really means is that we can expect people in the future to experience loneliness, isolation, and regret because they waited too long to get married and have kids. I think it's finally time for our society to admit that the sexual revolution and its anti-natalist, anti-family agenda was not such a great thing for men or women. It's time for the sexes to form a united front against the ideologies that are making people miserable and return to more functional sexual norms. We need to stop teaching girls and women that the drudgery of child-rearing is akin to slavery, and instead teach them that motherhood is a blessing and a gift. We must also do whatever's possible to facilitate families to form, grow, and thrive. Nobody is getting what they want. Women aren't getting commitment. Men are not getting sex. There is ruthless competition between men and women when there should be complementary cooperation. The beliefs we as a society have accepted derive from a philosophy that's based on things that aren't even true. And this has led to bad outcomes. The old notions about sex, like waiting until marriage and having defined gender roles, were based on facts. There were solid reasons for their existence. But the ideologies outlined in the sexual state that we've adopted aren't even based in reality. These false beliefs have not served us well, but how can we be surprised? Sex does make babies, men and women are different, and divorce is bad for everyone. If the problems between men and women are the result of a faulty belief system, then maybe changing that belief system would lead to better outcomes. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it to be educational and insightful. I'm working on my next video, which will be about the immature versus the mature feminine. If you would like to share your thoughts with me, or you have any book recommendations, please leave a comment down below. My sources will be cited in the description. So thank you again for watching, and see you next time.